Ellen is currently set to receive her NHS pension, which is her work pension, when she reaches state pension age, which her NHS app, pension app, tells her is currently 68 years old, which absolutely shocked me. That's because pension freedom age is 57 currently. So when I reach 57, I will be able to access my workplace pension. She won't. Hi, my name is Edmund Greaves. I'm editor of personal finance platform Mouthy Money. Starting a new series of videos, which is me talking about big issues in personal finance, things I find out week to week and learn and that happen to me and my family and our finances, and just trying to share a bit of that knowledge and experience with the Mouthy Money audience, just to hope that it helps and to spark debate and conversation. So you might see, or if you go to the Mouthy Money website this week, you'll see we've done a bit of a deep dive on the NHS pension. Now, what we found in our report that we've pulled together this week, which has gone into great detail about kind of how it works and this kind of thing, and we did that because it's been back in the news because of doctor strikes and this kind of stuff. But we really wanted to get to grips with how the system works, because many people are on this current system and it's quite complicated to understand. Now, on reading the findings of the report that we've pulled together, which I didn't actually pull together myself, I was actually quite shocked, and it's basically blown up my family, and my wife's existing financial plans. Now, I'm going to explain why and the kind of reasons behind that, which is to do with the state pension, and kind of go into a little bit of detail on what's going on and why it could be a problem, especially if your partner works in the NHS, you work in the NHS, and you have an NHS pension. Now, we looked at how the system works. I've been pretty complacent about retirement plans up until now, until I discovered this kind of shocking news about how the NHS pension age works. So just to explain, I don't get an NHS pension. I have a workplace pension with my employer, but my wife Ellen, who is a nurse, she does receive the NHS pension. Because I'm the money guy in the relationship, this is what I do for a living, I often kind of bugged her to hear more about how her pension works, how the NHS pension works, admittedly being very limited in what I understood about it. Now we've looked at the system, has kind of really shocked me, and it's spurred both of us to kind of do something about it. Now I'm going to go into the background a little bit, but just to explain, the big problem here is that the pension age for the NHS pension, 2015 pension, I should be clear, is the same as the state pension age. So my wife Ellen is currently set to receive her NHS pension, which is her work pension, when she reaches state pension age, which her NHS app, pension app, tells her is currently 68 years old, which absolutely shocked me. That's because pension freedom age is 57 currently. So when I reach 57, I will be able to access my workplace pension. She won't. Now, this all comes down to how the state pension works. I've been pretty openly critical about the state pension in the past. People might have seen videos on places like TikTok about that. For me, the state pension is not really a lot better than a kind of a government-sanctioned Ponzi scheme. How it works, it's not funded. Current taxpayers are footing the bill for what gets paid out to people over state pension age now. What you've built up over 35 years is sort of irrelevant. There's no money in a bank account somewhere. It's one group of people paying for another group's. This is very, very misunderstood. People tend to think that it's being your national insurance contributions being squirreled away somewhere by the government, but it's just simply not true. This, I'm not going to get into the kind of the weeds on that, but this creates a particular issue for the government, especially given how the state pension triple lock works. Now, the triple lock guarantees the state pension will increase every year in line with either inflation, wage growth, or 2.5%, whichever of those is higher. This basically builds into the system locked in unsustainable increases, because it's always going to grow faster than the tax base can kind of cover the payments off. Now, recently we found out, and the government is obliged to every 6 years, is to look at the sustainability of the state pension system and decide whether it's kind of currently fit for purpose. It's supposed to be a kind of broad-based review of how the state pension benefit is working and how sustainable it is as it exists today. So there's a problem here in that there's various options that the government could look at in order to ensure sustainability and affordability, but politically speaking, it's probably only going to go for one of these options. Now, I'm going to explain what these options are and how they might work. So the first one is means testing. Now, this is something I've talked about before. If you take the top 10% wealthiest state pension age retirees out of the benefit, so you stop giving it to them, you'd save billions immediately. And those kind of households will probably barely notice because they're getting income from all sorts of other places like private pensions and annuities and that kind of stuff. It would make future increases a lot more sustainable because you're basically cutting how much you're having to give out, although it wouldn't ultimately solve some of those long-term affordability issues because the bill would still keep rising just at a slightly lower level. And it just potentially wouldn't go far enough. The second one is to abolish the triple lock. Now, I've explained how the triple lock works, and I think that's quite well understood, generally speaking. It's politically very difficult. Most political parties don't seem to want to touch it. But the triple lock is making future increases unsustainable. I think the latest report we saw from the Adam Smith Institute suggested that basically the system could be bankrupt effectively by 2036, which is 11 years away. Instead, you should kind of get rid of the triple lock and just match it to something like inflation. That would mean that as the payments exist currently would go up in line with the cost of living. Again, though, that might not go far enough because it's still going to be a lot of money, in the future that's paying out. Now, the third way, and perhaps the most revolutionary and interesting, but possibly, almost certainly completely politically impossible, despite the fact several other countries have done this successfully, would be to transition the system away from intergenerational transfers, as I explained, and more towards creating actual savings pots that people could tap into at retirement, government-backed savings pots. It would be the most effective way to basically stop the spiraling cost of the system, and it would be the most honest way of reforming it too. You'd obviously have to transition that, so only people under a certain age currently would probably have to transition to contributing towards a new system. It would be quite complicated to implement. Politically, again, as I say, it would probably be extremely difficult to implement just because of the nature of politics in the country. It would take time to do, and it would probably lead to some disappointment, particularly for those people nearer to that kind of border cutoff between young and old. Now, the last option, and this is the option that's almost certainly going to happen, and which brings me back to my problem with the NHS pension, is the one way which they've done in the past to make the state pension more affordable is to increase the age at which you can receive it. That means that, typically speaking, instead of, say, receiving it at 65 and then getting it for an average of 25 years, if you increase it to 70, then you only get it for maybe 20 years, depending on how long you live. And that saves the government a lot of money. But again, the problem is that what that does is it just continues to rob Peter to pay Paul. You're still taking from young people and giving that back, giving that to people who've already retired based on a system that fundamentally doesn't work. But we've got this review now happening, and I think the outcome looks most likely to be we're going to have to increase the state pension age again. So why does this all matter, and why am I talking about state pension reforms in the context of my wife's pension? Well, it's because the state pension age dictates what age she can get her NHS pension at. The post-2015 system is set up so that you get what is called a career average over those years. So she has to work that full term to 68 to get kind of the pension, the full level of the pension she wants. The problem with this is that it's devastating for our current plans for retirement. Now, that's because if she has to wait until 68, which she might not want to do, and she probably doesn't want to do, it's a lot more years having to work. If she wants to retire a bit earlier, it means she'll get less from her pension, and she's also probably going to have to rely more on my pension, because I will be able to access 57. She'll only be able to access it much later. I'm 3 years older than her, and that means that it's, the best part of 13 years we might have to use my pension if I'm not working, or I might have to end up having to work longer and not draw down on my pension. So what does this mean? This means my pension is going to have to work a lot harder to achieve this, potentially on a shorter time frame than I would have envisaged initially. For us, it's actually quite devastating, because it means, we can't just coast along with our current plan as it exists. We have to make a change now. We're both in our 30s. We've still got time on our side. But the good news is that we've sat down together and we've talked about it since this kind of came to light, and we've reevaluated what we're going to do. So there is something we can do about that. So what are we doing? We're going to set up a SIP for Ellen, for my wife. And that is a private pension that she can manage and contribute to, and she doesn't have to rely on the NHS for her retirement income when she decides she wants to retire. We're going to aim to put in around £100 a month, and then index and link that to inflation, so that the contributions go up every year. Over 25 years, when you include kind of the tax relief that you get and the compounding of investing, hopefully it should build up a reasonable nest egg. I don't think over the long term that's going to be enough, though, to kind of cover that shortfall that she might want, not continuing to work in the NHS. So in turn, I'm going to start dialing up my contributions too. As I said before, I was kind of coasting. I thought kind of what I'm contributing now would be fine. And I do have a pot currently of about £40,000 in my pension, which is a pretty good starting point. I'm not going to start kind of assuming annual compound growth rates and, predict a figure for 25 years in the future, but it's a good jumping off point, and the potential for growth, if I contribute, even a little bit more to what I'm currently doing, is going to make a big difference. And hopefully that's going to, it's going to really mean that we don't have to rely on the NHS pension when we're in our 60s. I did think at first, because we've got lifetime ISAs that we used when we bought our home, I did think of using the LISA as a product, because you do get a nice bonus in there. And the attractiveness of an ISA is that it's tax-free forever. Pensions do have tax implications when you kind of reach the age at which you can draw down on that pension. The big problem with the lifetime ISA, though, for me, as a retirement product, is you can't access it until you turn 60, and you have to stop contributing to it when you turn 50. So that's 10 years of no contributions, which kind of, makes the bonus and all that kind of stuff useless. So we're going to focus on using SIPs, which are private pensions. I've got one alongside my workplace pension, and Ellen is going to set one up now as well. And you just got to let that money, with the extra tax relief that you get at the start, do that work up front through investing, and that's going to make the difference for us. Now, what's my kind of final takeaway? For anybody who's listened to this who doesn't have an NHS pension but is just interested in what to do with theirs and how to plan for retirement, make sure you're on top of it. Make sure you have a plan. That's what we're kind of all about here at Mouthy Money. Make sure you've got a plan, stick to that plan, review it, keep it up to date. Your goals will change and that kind of thing. If you work in the NHS, I'm urging you now to get to grips with what your pension is, how much it's worth, and what it could be worth in the future, and what your state pension age is, because that will affect the post 2015, especially if the government decides to review it upwards. It looks like it could go towards 70. You might want to think about doing something different, starting up an independent, SIP, and contributing to that as an extra point, even if it's just to cover you for the years before you can then access your NHS pension. There's no doubt that the NHS pension is pretty lucrative. Of course, there might be changes to that in the future, but I think, you've got to think ahead, and the more time you have, the better you have to do. You've got to make sure you're not left, working for years longer than you necessarily want to. So that's it. I think that's, really important. You need to make sure you're on top of it. Best of luck. Do let me know in the comments your experiences, and if you've had thoughts about this, do give us a like and a follow, subscribe. Super helpful to the channel. And just as a final disclaimer, this article is produced for informational purposes only. Should not be construed as investment, legal, tax, or other forms of financial advice. If you're in any doubt about the themes expressed, think about consulting with a regulated financial professional to assess your own personal situation. With investing, past performance is no guarantee of future results. Investments can go down as well as up. You can get back less than you started with. Investments are inherently speculative, and it can be affected by volatility. Never invest more than you can afford to lose. If you want more information, go to www.fca.org.uk/investsmart. Thank you, everybody, and goodbye.